everyone, Chris Patterson here. Welcome once again to my channel, and today I'm going to start talking about different elements of books, but not like plot and characterization. I'm going to start talking about things like, should there be swearing in my book? Should there be violence? Should there be sex? What kind of diversity makes sense in my book? You know, these are things that I think a lot of writers don't think about, and then they come up and all of a sudden we're kind of blindsided by, you know, a really weird review or something like that. So, you know, things from, like I said, things from sex to, you know, diversity to, I don't know, any modern day issue or topic that comes up in movies and books. And so today I'm going to start off with one that I think is really, really popular, and that is sex. Should you have sex in your books? And you know, I think the first thing that you need to ask yourself is why is it there? Like with anything, and I'll probably repeat this through however many videos this takes, maybe 4, maybe 10. Why is it there? If it's there just for awe factor, no good. Okay, that really exposes, and I'm going to be very blunt here, that really exposes bad writing. Okay, and you know, I mean, the fact that you're attempting to write a book or a story, number one, shows that you at least have that initiative, that you're probably somewhere deep down inside you are a good writer, and maybe you just need to work on your craft. I am not a fan of just putting stuff in there, whether it's sex or drugs or language or violence or whatever it is, just for awe factor, just to check a box, right? I need to have diversity, so I put this person in there. I'm not a big fan of that. It needs to make sense for your story. Okay, so that's the first question you need to ask. Okay, if I'm going to put a sex scene into my book, does it make sense with the story, or am I just putting it in there because I want to get a rise out of people, both figuratively and literally? So that's the first thing. The second thing I think you need to ask yourself is, who am I writing to? Who is my audience? Okay. In my opinion, and I think this is an opinion that a lot of people hold, but obviously this is my opinion. If you are writing middle grade or lower, so this is like middle school level or lower, no, absolutely not. And you can disagree with me all you want. That's your right. You will not change my mind on that. Okay. Now, if you're writing a young adult book, okay, this is where it gets a little tricky, I think, because the reality is, as a teenager, especially in the United States, you know, sex is a reality, especially with relationships. And so I don't think that the idea of sex is off limits in a young adult book, but it's how we write it. I'm going to talk about that in just a second, okay? But know your audience, okay? Know your audience. If you're writing specifically like spiritual or Christian fiction, and my books, my fantasy books, one of the categories I fall under is Christian fiction, Christian fantasy. And so this is, again, a question you have to ask yourself. And just because you're writing to a faith-based community of readers does not automatically mean, no, you should not put sex in your books. But again, how do I do it, and how do I portray it, okay? You know, if there's a couple other things, like if I think if you're writing nonfiction, it's a little different, right? So I'm going to talk more specifically about fiction here, okay? But know your audience, and in terms of age, in terms of, you know, faith or belief system, you know, things like that. Number 2, you got to know your genre, right? If you are writing a book that is romance, I mean, the center of romance is sex, right? So that's probably going to be present in the book. If you're writing men's or women's adventure, oftentimes there's some sort of love interest, so it might be present in the book. You know, things like mysteries, detective stories, horror stories, PI. You know, again, I think the reality is, or the thing you need to really ask yourself is, does it make sense for the story? Why is it in there? And then there's other genres like fantasy and sci-fi, in my opinion. I said horror before. I should have, you know, there's not a whole lot of opportunity, in my opinion, to have sex scenes in these kinds of books. And I mean, obviously, that's not the case throughout. I mean, if you read any of George R.R. Martin stuff. I mean, some of his, I'm not a prude or anything, but some of his scenes I just had to flip through. I mean, yeah, it was pretty intense. So I just again, I think there's certain genres that lend themselves to the possibility of having a sex scene more than others. And certainly if you're writing erotica, I mean, that is writing about sex. Now, that being said, even though that is not my cup of tea, not my preferred genre, I have read some erotica that is really, really well written. I mean, the author is obviously a good writer. And then I've read some erotica where it's clearly just someone writing pornography and trying to get people to read it through the off factor and get clicks and page reads on Amazon and stuff like that. Okay. So once you figure out who your audience is, what age group, and then your genre, then it comes down to what kind of sex scene am I going to write? If it's erotica, you can be pretty damn descriptive, right? If it's romance, if it's clean romance, right? Clean romance is a romance novel without language and without on-page sex scenes. So what is an on-page off-page? Well, an off-page sex scene is a scene, and this is where I said, kind of like with young adult books, you know, if you're dealing with modern-day teenagers and things like that, well, I mean, you can imply that sex happened. You can even maybe show some of the lead up, and I don't mean like foreplay. I mean like two people meeting, two people like gazing into each other's eyes, however you do that, and then imply that they had sex. In some cases. And I think even in clean fiction, depending on the situation, you could potentially do that. So the next question when it comes to sex scene is, how am I going to write it, right? And you have to understand, the more descriptive that you are, you're going to cut off a certain audience. And you may be okay with that. You also have to understand that the more reserved you are, there may be an audience out there that wants to have nothing to do with it. You know, some audiences are looking for nitty and gritty and lots of language and lots of violence and things like that. So there is a case. I do believe that it is more so the other way, though. I do believe that the more descriptive you get with your sex scene, you're placing your story or your book in a much more specific niche, okay? There's some people out there that just don't care, and then there's definitely some people out there that, as it gets more descriptive and more visual, it's going to turn them off. And then there's definitely a group out there that, you know, anything outside of an off-page sex scene, even then, I mean, I have an off-page sex scene in my first book, and through several reviews, there were some people that really, really did not like it. Oh, well. Okay, I think it moved the story forward. I think it did a lot to help explain who that particular character is and was. And so that's why I put it in there, right? So, sex. Do we put it in our books or not? I mean, obviously, ultimately, that's up to you. I think the first thing you have to ask yourself is, does it move the story forward, right? Does it cast a character in a certain way that helps the story? Does it explain who the character is? Does it put the character into a certain situation that they need to work themselves out of? You know, going back to my videos on plotting, right? Does it line up with or have anything to do with any one of those checkpoints, right? Is it a major setback? Is it point of no return? Does it relate to a change of plans or the final push? Whatever the case may be. I think that's the first question you have to ask. The second question you have to ask is, who is your audience, right? What age group? Who's the reader? Is it clean fiction? Is it Christian fiction? Things like that. And then thirdly, I think you need to ask, what kind of genre are you in, which are you writing? You know, some genres just that's not necessarily very present in those genres. And then lastly, you have to decide how descriptive you're going to be. I mean, do you want this to be pornography? Because if it is, there's a lot of people out there that aren't going to read it. But I mean, right now, if you take a look at the #1 bestsellers on Amazon, they're like 45-page, really quick, poorly written eroticas. Okay, so you know, it just depends on what your goals are as a writer. Okay, so anyways, I hope I don't know if this was helpful, maybe thought-provoking, but you know, as always, keep reading. If you're a writer, keep writing, and until next time, peace.